Através da nossa plataforma, impulsionamos o desenvolvimento de profissionais, compartilhamos experiências e fomentamos o ecossistema de inovação, aproximando pessoas e empresa. Seja muito bem-vindo à Strix One.
Aqui você vai encontrar diversos programas e minisséries em vídeo e podcasts, webinários e transmissões, cursos e treinamentos sobre temas técnicos, artigos, publicações e palestras dos eventos mais importantes da cadeia sucroenergética e agro do país.
Junte-se à Strix One e tenha acesso 100% online a conteúdos novos semanalmente em diferentes formatos. Estude no tempo livre e dê um upgrade na sua carreira. Crie conexões com profissionais da sua área, forme parcerias de negócio e divulgue o seu produto para o público certo. Aqui, nós semeamos o conhecimento.
Você sabia que quase 60% da população mundial já está online? Isso porque a internet nos permite economia de tempo, redução de custos, bem-estar, motivação, entre muitos outros benefícios. Uma pesquisa mostrou que só durante a quarentena a busca por treinamentos online cresceu 130% no Google.
E aí, vai ficar de fora da comunidade mais inovadora do Brasil? Faça parte da Strix One.
Vamos juntos? Strix One, infinitas ideias, uma comunidade.
Tecnologia conecta pessoas e transforma vidas. CropLife Brasil.
Olá, bom dia. Welcome, everyone. My name is Plínio Nastari. Welcome to the 4th edition of Global Agribusiness Forum 2022 Warm-Ups. I am the founder and president of DATAGRO, and I will be conducting the event this morning. This series of warm-ups create a virtual international meeting room to be used by the greatest names in agribusiness. The goal is to heat up the conversation around topics such as food security, climate change, and sustainability, which will be the main theme of our big event. The Global Agribusiness Forum is one of the most relevant agribusiness meetings around the world. This year's edition will happen on July 25 and 26 in São Paulo, Brazil. It will be live streamed in English with Portuguese interpretation. Every single warm-up session, as well as the Global Agribusiness Forum event, will be aired online for free. Our mission is to promote change by connecting the public to the main decision makers in international agribusiness. As a reminder, the Global Agribusiness Forum is a two-day international event that aims at raising awareness and promoting a sustainable social, economic, and environmental development. It connects the greatest leaders of the world agribusiness to exchange information, share their expertise, and address humanity's biggest food challenges today. The GAF is promoted by large entities of the agribusiness sector, such as SRB, the Brazilian Rural Society, ABRAMILHO, the Brazilian Association of Corn Producers, MAIZALL, the International Maize Alliance, ABCZ, the Brazilian Association of Zebu Breeders, ABRAFRUTAS, Brazilian Association of Exporting Producers of Fruits and Byproducts, FNS, the National Sugar and Ethanol Forum, UNEM, the National Union of Corn Ethanol, ABPA, the Brazilian Association for Animal Protein, and DATAGRO. We would like to thank CropLife Brazil for its vital contribution as a master sponsor. We also thank the important sponsorships of Bradesco and of DEAG. We also thank the support of VBSO Advogados and Yara, and the collaboration of Kerry, Aurora Cooperative, Cochupé, Lease Plan, and Cantic Caldic, that besides supporting the main event, are also supporting this warm-up session. The Global Agribusiness Forum 4th warm-up edition will address the topic Sustainable Food System and Food Security, Part 1. This is a very crucial topic, in particular in light of the fact that, according to estimates, between 700 to 830 million people suffer from hunger or malnourishment. Also because, in light of the tragic humanitarian concern and tragedy that we have with the war in Ukraine, prices of commodities around the world, including energy, metals, and soft commodities, have been on the rise to a very large extent. Concerns about not only energy, but also food security have become even more at stake, given the concerns about sustainable production of food items and supply of fertilizers around the world. So we think that it's very timely that GAF conducts this warm-up edition about sustainable food system and food security. At this moment, to moderate the panel, I invite Professor Sérgio Schneider, full professor at UFRGS in the Department of Sociology, and also permanent member of the graduate programs in Rural Development and Sociology. Joining us as our brilliant speakers today, I would like to invite Professor John Wilkinson, full professor at UFRRJ in the Postgraduate Program of Social Sciences in Development, Agriculture, and Society. And also invite Dr. Daniel Balaban, Director of the World Food Programme's Center of Excellence Against Hunger and representative of the United Nations World Food Programme in Brazil. During this presentation, viewers are encouraged to post comments and send questions, since we'll have a Q&A session at the end. I'm calling from Ames, Iowa, and here it is 39 Fahrenheit. And I thank you very much, all of you, for joining us in this session. I now pass the floor to Professor Sérgio Schneider, and I wish you all a great event. Professor Sérgio.
Hello. Good morning, everybody. Thanks, Dr. Plinio Nastari, for the gentle introduction. I also would like to thank for the inviters of this global seminar. We are in tough times, and food, agriculture, agribusiness is a disruptive matter, and we need to find the pathways for the next times, because the world is facing important changes, and not just related to climate change, but now also to the consequences of the war that's going on in the world. So today we have a pleasure to have with us two renowned scholars and well known in Brazil, but not just Brazil, also in Latin America and in the world, that are working on issues of food, agriculture, and agribusiness and food systems. So we will have then the presentation of the two professors, and we will start with Professor John Wilkinson for a 30 minutes presentation. Professor John Wilkinson is a dear colleague of mine from the Federal University, rural university from Rio de Janeiro, in the Center of Studies of Development and Agriculture. And since long time, he has been working on issues about the food system and the changes on food. So, Professor John Wilkinson, the floor is yours for your presentation. And later on, I will introduce also Dr. Daniel Balaban. So, okay, for now.
Thank you very much, Sérgio, for this warm introduction, and I'm very pleased and honored to take part in this in this meeting on a very, very central theme. Plinio has already placed the context, the seriousness of the context in which we have to discuss questions of sustainability and food security. In the last 3 years, we've gone through COVID, we've gone through now more recently the Ukraine war, and we have seen an increasing number of extreme climate events, which altogether create a great urgency around this question and accelerate a lot of the points which I will refer to in my presentation, which has led to a consensus, not only in terms of civil society organizations, but in terms of policy and in terms of the academic and scientific community, that the food system is in radical need of repair. All the problems which have been indicated over the years have now become extremely pressing, with the Brazil has normally been seen as the food basket of the world, but now we are seeing that Ukraine and Russia are the food baskets of Europe and Africa, and also very important in Asian markets. In response to the crisis, more and more countries are controlling their participation in international trade, which only increases the problems of access and price, increasing the number of those in extreme situation of food insecurity. I want to situate all this within a framework of the transformations in the global food system over the last 20, 30 years, focusing particularly on the issue of what I see as a new innovation paradigm and its possibilities and uncertainties and risks. If we can move on to the first slide, I talk here about what I see as the long construction of a new agenda for agro-food, which we can date from the 70s or the 80s, depending on the countries and the levels of organization. But for a long time now, ever since the crisis of the commodity markets in the 70s, the food system has been the subject of increasing criticisms. But not only the question of criticisms, they've been the subject of alternative movements and alternative ways of organizing the food system. Initially for alternative networks, small groups, but over time, these values and these initiatives of market construction have become more and more diffused. I refer to the organics movement, which now is a huge movement worldwide. The concept of short circuits and the critique of the global value chains. The focus on fresh rather than industrial products. The question of social justice, and a more recent perhaps, but increasingly important issue, that of animal welfare. All of these issues have become mainstream over the years and have been internalized in discourse and in actions by mainstream sections of the agro-food industry. These essentially rural movements have been combined with urban social movements, particularly around the issues of food health, well-being, and public health. The slow food movement emerged in Italy against what it was seen as the junk food of the fast food industry, and has become an international movement. Campaigns around food deserts have gained echoes in public policies. Local markets have exploded in the north and are now supported by official organizations. Urban agriculture, which was initially limited to subsistence initiatives by marginal urban populations, is increasingly seen as a component of urban planning. If we add to this the question of the goals around the Sustainable Development Goals and the goals around climate, which have passed from being discourses to being commitments with targets and goals. If we take into account the dietary guidelines adopted by more and more countries, if we look at the way local governments are giving priorities in the food meals programs and the public procurement programs, we see that increasingly all these values which have emerged from civil society, are being taken on board by public policy and by global conventions. At the same time, we've seen an enormous shift in consumer practices over the last 2 decades, perhaps more. New subjectivities, new concepts of identity have led to an explosion of vegetarianism and veganism. The data is obviously very difficult to be precise about, but we're now talking about mainstreaming vegetarianism and veganism, and the emergence of what is called flexitarianism, which people who are meat eaters but are wanting to cut down on meat consumption and therefore open to alternatives. If we look at the scientific community and the academic community, from being a critique of the dominant food system, being rather a question of alternative discourses, the EAT program published by The Lancet in 2019, which called for a drastic reduction of per capita meat consumption and similar increase in fresh products, brings to the mainstream a conception that the food system is at a crossroads and needs to be radically restructured. If we look at the mainstream actors in the food, a lot of these actors have already internalized these positions, have accepted new criteria on ingredients, have accepted to remove ingredients considered bad for health, have committed themselves to targets of decarbonizing the food chains, and have incorporated notions of sustainability, not simply at the level of discourse, but in terms of specific targets and modes of operation. So I think there is a radical change we can identify along this period where critiques, what have seemed to be radical critiques, are now seen to be mainstream obligations. Can we move on to the next slide, please? But all this happens at a time when there is an absolutely profound process of innovation sweeping the food system, which has built on the digital revolution from the 80s onwards, and now is being applied as never before to the food system itself. If we look at the previous innovations, the Green Revolution, for instance, that was fundamentally led by the public sector, the CGR system. And it was to do with increasing supply, increasing productivity. A second wave of innovation was the introduction of genetic engineering and transgenics. This was led by the private sector, but the private sector integrally involved in the agro-food system. Now we have a situation where innovation is fundamentally being driven by actors who have no historic links to the food system. They're new actors made possible by processes of financiarization, which is leading to the explosive development of startups in all the sectors of the agro-food system, financed by venture capital and investment funds, initially a US Silicon Valley model, but now entirely global, with probably the majority of funding now coming from outside the US. And the startups emerging specifically from the academic and scientific milieu by urban actors trying to respond to global problems in a radically new way. Many of them clearly mission-oriented and emerging from social movements. The data is obviously is moving all the time. The numbers are contested by different authorities and different sources, but we're now talking about thousands of startups. One source would talk of over 10,000 startups, food tech, ag-food tech startups around the world by 2022. And so we're talking about an enormous movement which has no central control and which is being pushed by very, very different actors in different contexts. Corporate players have been calculated in terms of 240 corporate players involved, with over 3,000 venture capital firms organizing these startups, and 980 individual angel investors, as they're called. So it's a huge ecosystem of innovation. And in addition to the general focus of how to deal with the problems of food security in a world which is now a global world and a world which is still in rapid demographic growth, these actors are not constrained by the traditional limits of the agro-food chains. They can make great leaps in imagination to deal with this problem. They've not got interests at stake. More than that, different countries are emerging as leaders in this innovation, particularly countries which have extreme problems of resources, but are at the same time rich in capital. Centers like Singapore, Israel, China increasingly, the Netherlands in Europe. And so there is a global ecosystem which is developing innovation, radical innovation, affecting all the chain, all the links in the chain. And the focus I want to draw attention to is that while a lot of the startups are focused on, let's say, traditional issues of greater efficiency in agriculture through the control of information and the ability to use information, the focus, the leading focus today is not agriculture as such, but the leading focus is food. And it's how to change the nature of the food supply. Not simply to change the amount of the food supply, its capacity of supply, but how to create a food system which can attend the enormous demands of urbanization, population growth within the constraints of climate change and extreme weather events, and also the issues of pollution, biodiversity, all the other problems associated with the dominant model of agro-food. What we have seen ever since the 80s and accelerating since then is a transformation in the dynamic of the food industry. Normally, we think about agribusiness. We think about agriculture integrated into inputs and machinery and oriented to traders and processors. Now, the food industry is very often treated separately. It's treated by industrial economics and not by rural studies. And in industrial economics, it's seen as a traditional sector, not very dynamic. But in fact, today, what we're seeing is a revolution in the food industry itself. And that is something which will change fundamentally the options open to us for food security. Two major goals around the world of startups. On the one hand, as I see it, is a move to, in relation to fresh produce, a move perhaps away from a traditional approach to create resistance to problems of nature and climate, to a move towards the protection of production from the climate. And more than that, a control over the climate, rather than a strategy of strengthening agricultural production to resist the climate. And so I think controlled environment agriculture, both in the city and the countryside, is an area of enormous importance, huge investments, and likely grand transformations in the coming decades. And the second area, equally important, more dramatic in its consequences, is the effort to short circuit the grains, meats complexes through the production of alternative animal protein. If we can move on now, the next slide, please. This data really is not, there's no one piece of data which will capture all this. There are a whole range of bodies which are producing data on the numbers and the values involved, the investments. And I don't want to fix on any one particular data. I just threw this out because I've used it in the past. It's very outdated at the moment. And there are other more which show a greater development. But you see that there are investments at all the levels of the food industry. A huge impact of the transformations is obviously in food delivery. And that is to do as well with the question of COVID. The explosion of all this development, we're talking about less than a decade now, these developments. And so the issues of food delivery being particularly produced by the question of COVID. But even so, 10% of investments is going into novel foods. If we can move on now, please. Move the slide. So this is an idea of the funding, which is produced by Agro-Food Tech. It shows the explosion of investments Now, we're talking about 50 billion investments here in 2021. 50 billion investments is something like 20 times the total R&D spending of the leading global food firm. So we're not talking about marginal types of investments. We're talking, and this is venture funding. This is not funding by the public sector, which is extremely important in a number of countries. Doesn't include sovereign funds. And so the figures are probably much higher. Can we move on, please, to the next slide? This is just a picture to show this extraordinary multiplicity of sources of financing for the three most important alternative meat firms. Two of the meat firms, Beyond Meat and Impossible Foods, are of vegetable alternatives. Whereas the other, which is now called, which was Memphis Meat and is now Upside, is cellular meat. And you see an interconnection of various investment funds in all of them, a lot of individual angel finances, but also major investment funds like Kozla funds and others, and Temasek from, these are funds which have up to 50, 100 billion dollars in the portfolios. If we can move on now. So if we look quickly at the question of innovations in alternative proteins, one of the sources I've used, and again, probably we would have to check it with lots of other sources, would number the plant-based food companies today at more than 800 worldwide. Others would put this figure higher. Fermentation companies, which are much more recent, they've really exploded only in the last 3-4 years, are calculated as 88. Cultivated meat companies, that's meat companies which are producing cellular meat, not commercially, except for a level of select restaurants, but 110. That has gone up from 4 5 years ago. It's a huge explosion of innovation. And insect protein companies, which number in the thousands, but have also become extremely important. There are 59 insect companies in Europe, for instance. High-tech companies, one of which has over $1 billion in funding, which have been especially stimulated by the World Bank and the FAO reports on these. Plant-based companies have drawn most attention. All the leading food firms are also producing plant-based meat products, whether it's Marfrig and JBS in Brazil or Tyson and Cargill in the States, ADM, all are producing plant-based meats of various kinds. And increasingly, the whole range of animal protein is involved. In fact, it's the milk-derived products which has been most affected to date. Meat, secondly, and seafood increasingly as Asia becomes more and more involved in plant-based food. As I say, all the leading companies are involved. and not just in plant-based meats, but they're involved also in fermentation companies, in startups, and in cultivated meat. Tyson, for instance, is in the top 3 of these categories. It is acquired firms in each of these areas. Now, ADM, for instance, is planning now the biggest insect protein factory in the world. So there's a huge development. Fermentation companies have arrived very quickly. In fact, fermentation was an old product, was one of the famous products which we analyzed years ago, which produced corn as an alternative meat substrate. And now fermentation companies are exploding with huge, the leading firms involved, and are seen as a competitive alternative to plant-based food companies. Just as an idea on insect protein, the World Bank calculates that 14% of all animal feed for meats and fish in Africa, in the African continent, could be produced by insect protein within a period of 5 years. And so we're talking about major shifts there. Can we move on, please? I haven't got really time anymore. I think have I got 5 more minutes perhaps?
Yes, 5 minutes, John. Yes, okay.
Okay, I'll go very quickly through this. The other area is controlled environment agriculture. And there are different types, different categories. And the dominant category is the large scale plant factory with artificial lighting. This is the ultimate extreme of substituting the sun and substituting the soil and being able to produce food in a completely urban setting. There are formidable technical and economic constraints. But here again, what is noticeable is the huge amount of investment going into these firms and the huge commitment of the leading agro-food firms. Marks and Spencer's, Walmart, Kroger's, Whole Foods, all the supermarket chains are financing these firms. And these firms have a capacity, an extraordinary capacity for production. It calculated that you only need 20 factories in Norway to provide all the greens of the country. A UK firm plans to be able to produce 70% of all UK demand by 2030. So these levels of concentration of production, they can only work through a greater integration with the supermarkets. And so this model really reinforces the concentration of the food industry to an extraordinary degree in these segments. For instance, at the moment, there are 23,000 horticulture producers in the United States. On this sort of a perspective, you would end up with something like 20 firms, 20 plants, perhaps. No? But these aren't the only options. There are the other 3 options that I've talked about, the other 3 types. They are much more integrated into urban dynamics and into urban patterns of living. They're modular shipping containers which can be produced as adjuncts to shops. They can be produced as adjuncts to cafeterias and restaurants. And there are a whole range now of options for domestic use at the same time. And so while there is a dominant model which is receiving the greater part of the financing, there is also a huge development of which is based on integrating the production of fresh produce into a new conception of urban living. All right, let's move on from there. I only can say this in sort of two words, really, that all of this question of innovation and all this question of social food security has to be looked at from the point of view of the increasingly pivotal role of China in the world food system of trade, and in the degree to which its own market is becoming the key market for global investment. National security for China is a global strategy. And increasingly, we are seeing that in spite of its extraordinary advances in agriculture, it is becoming less and less self-sufficient. As a result, China is becoming more and more centrally concerned with limiting its dependence in the protein, animal protein and feed global chains. A whole range of measures at the level of consumption have been put into place to curb consumption. But more than that, and to curb specifically a whole range of programs and incentives to diminish the dependence on animal feed. More recently, the policy in the 2025 agricultural plan refers specifically to the need to develop cellular protein and talks about the need to switch from scarce resources to more abundant resources of plants, microorganisms, and cell culture. There is also a huge development of climate-controlled agriculture in China, particularly in relation to extreme climate situations, like the Gobi Desert, for instance. They have a huge, together with Israel, cooperation program for developing climate-controlled agriculture in these regions. And so I think in the short term, what we're seeing is a greater dependence on global markets by China, but in the long term, a strategy to establish greater autonomy, which will be of considerable importance for Brazil's thinking about its own strategies for the future. All right, I will just conclude now very quickly, if we can move on. Can we just have the conclusion? I would say that the dominant food system, by its own admission increasingly, is recognized to be increasingly broken. This, together with the COVID, Ukraine, extreme climate events, all call for more radical, short-term and broader investments in radical alternatives. The innovation model, which is in development at the moment has a whole range of risks. Extremely high levels of economic concentration are one outcome. A greater resort to the use of intellectual property and patents is another. Rejection on the demand side, we've already seen this in relation to the transgenics, is another. And the uncertainty of private investment driven in innovation. Is all this just a bubble? And will now the new financial situation provoked by Ukraine create unfavorable conditions for a continuation of this type of innovation? On the other hand, in that context, I think we must learn a lot from the way in which public policies are relating to these innovations in countries which are most directly affected by the constraints of resources. And the final point I would like to make is that the need emerges from this orientation to integrate discussions and policies on the food system integrally into policies on urban policies and urban planning. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor John, for this inspiring and also challenging, and I would say also threatening presentation with a lot of insights and a lot of ideas to discuss further. So let's see how our audience will react to them. I would all invite for people that are attending this meeting by streaming to prepare your issues, your points, and to address them by the chat, writing down the comments or the questions, because we will open up a session after Dr. Daniel Balaban, who I would like to introduce. He is an economist. He got also, he is actually the former director of the National Fund of Education Development in Brazil, in which he plays a very important role years ago, steering the Brazilian National Food, National School Meal Program, which has a very important increase during this time. And after that, he worked for a couple of years in the center of the Excellence Center of Against Hunger from the World Food Program, and is currently Daniel Balaban is currently the director and the representative of the United Nations Agency of the World Food Program in Brazil. So I'm very pleased to introduce Daniel. Daniel is very keen on issues on food, and especially food security, and I will give him the floor now. Please, Daniel, go ahead with your 35 minutes for presentation.
Thank you very much, Sérgio. Thank you very much. I would like to thank the invitation from DATAGRO in the name of Dr. Plinio Nastari. Of course, I would like to greet Dr. Sérgio Schneider, Dr. John Wilkinson, brilliant presentation. And as Sérgio said, I have a small presentation. I believe that Monique is organizing. I work in the World Food Program. Monique, please go on. I think that it's important for us first to understand what is the World Food Program, because not so many people in the world, they know about the World Food Program. But World Food Program is the leading UN, United Nations humanitarian organization. Is the greatest one that has more funds and leads with more people. And the main job of this humanitarian organization is to deliver food assistance in emergencies all around the world with communities to improve nutrition and build resilience. Just in 2021, last year, WFP assisted more than 120 million people around the world in more than 84 countries. Not just developing countries, but also middle-income countries where the WFP is now assisting the governments to create sustainable systems. Just for you understand the work that WFP does around the world, just in one given day now, for example, we have more than 5,600 trucks, 30 ships, and nearly 100 planes on the move around the world to bring food assistance to the people in need. So in all continents now, just because of the conflict in Ukraine, we are trying to feed more than 2 million people, refugees from Ukraine in the regions of Poland and other countries in the region. So you can imagine the work that WFP does around the world. Please move on. Next slide, please. And it's important to say that, as Professor John Wilkinson said, we are living now in a hunger catastrophe. It's important to go directly to the point. Conflict, COVID, the climate crisis, and the most important, the rising costs have combined in this year, and we have around 811 million people hungry in the world. This number is last year's, not this year. We will have the new numbers in few months, and I believe that this number will have increased because of all these catastrophes. I strongly believe that conflict is still the biggest driver of hunger, because 60% of the world's hungry people in the world, they live in afflicted areas afflicted by war and violence. So you can imagine more than half of the people that are in need, that are hungry in the world, they live in areas with violence. Just for you to know, we have a camp, refugee camp in the frontier of Bangladesh and Myanmar. It's called the Cox's Bazar, where we need to feed around 1 million people every day. And they are refugees, Rohingya refugees. They continue there in this refugee camp. In refugee camp, we need to understand that refugee people, they are not immigrants. They are trying to escape from hunger, to escape from bombs, to escape from war, to escape from death. If they stay in their houses, in their families, they would be dead now. So they need to leave. This is what happens in our brilliant world in the year of 2022. It's a shame. Sometimes I became ashamed to see what's happening in our world in these days. I always believed that in this 21st century, these things would become different, but it was not what's happening nowadays. So we have the increasing conflicts around the world. We have the climate shocks that destroying, as Professor John said, it's destroying lives, crops, and livelihoods. So at least 30 million people, they are leaving their homes and their lands because of the climate shocks. We have also the pandemic, because the pandemic in the last 2 years, they drove hunger to unprecedented levels. We suffer. A lot of people suffered so much because of the crisis that became because of the pandemic. And the most important that I would like to say is the cost of reaching people in need is completely rising. So just for you to understand, the WFP is the world's greatest purchaser of food in the world. We need to purchase food to feed these more than 150 million people in the world every day. And of course, the cost of food is up to 30% compared to 2-3 years ago. 30% in dollars. It's not in our currency, it's in dollars, okay? So you can imagine how cost, and the budget of WFP continues the same. So we cannot afford to purchase all the food that we need to purchase to attend all these demands that we are facing right now. The next, please. So it's important for us to understand the concept of food security. What is food security? So it's important to understand that food security is when the entire population at all times has the physical and economic conditions to have sufficient access to safe and nutritious food that meets their dietary needs and food preferences for a healthy and active life. Okay, this is the concept of food security in the world. So when we achieve food and nutrition security, we need to have availability of food, crop production, efficient water use, stocks, trades. We need to have access, because not just availability. We have availability of food in Brazil, but more than 20 million people, they don't have access to the food in Brazil nowadays. So because they don't have income, the prices are high, markets transfer, we need to organize infrastructure, food distribution within households, and gender issues that we will speak more later. And we need to understand the use and utilization of this food, the food and nutrition knowledge, food preparation and nutrition behavior, cultural traditions. It's very important to mention that. Knowledge, standards, health status, hygiene, care opportunities. So we need to take care about stable supply, risk reduction, and of course, environmental sustainability. Next, please. And what to do to end world hunger. Next, please. Next, please. So I believe that we need to focus in efficient agri-food systems. We have an agri-food system nowadays, but it's not efficient because the world is not on track to meet the food security and nutrition goals. As you know, we are trying to reach into 2030 a world without any hunger, and we are not on track. We are in 2022. We have just 8 years to 2030, and we are not on track to meet food security and nutrition goals for all the population. Nowadays, more than 3 billion people. 3 billion people. It's almost half of the world's population. They cannot afford the price of a healthy diet. They cannot pay the price of a healthy diet. Almost half of the population. As I mentioned, more than 800 million people, they suffer from chronic hunger. It is an increase of about 180 million in 5 years. So just in 5 years, okay, that we should decrease the number of the people. We increased the number of the people suffering from chronic hunger. We have nowadays 144 million children under the age of 5 that are stunted. 47 million are debilitated, and 38% are overweight. Overweight is also suffering from an inefficient nutrition system. More than 2 billion people suffer from overweight and obesity. Okay, so you can imagine when you see someone with overweight and obesity, they are not with a healthy and good stage. Sometimes we think, no, he's overweight, he's obesity, he's good. No, he's not good. He's suffering with the same problems that a person that is in chronic hunger suffers. They don't have the correct nutrients to have a healthy life. And a healthy diet is 5 times more expensive than a diet sufficient in energy, like just calorie, just to eat a hamburger, for example, and 60 more expensive than a diet sufficient in nutrients. So it's important to mention that, because sometimes we say to the people, oh, you need to have a healthy diet, but they look at us and say, okay, but I don't have money to do that. I cannot afford a healthy diet. This is a problem that we face nowadays and all around the world. Next, please. And it's important to say that the efficient agri-food systems, people that live and work in agri-food systems nowadays, they are by far the largest economic system in the world, measured in terms of people that work there, the employment, livelihoods, and planetary impact. In the world, we have 1 billion people that are employed in the production, harvesting, services, processing, and distribution of agri-food systems. And another 3.5 billion earn their living from them, through them, in the stages of the production. So it's more than half of the world population. If we take care of these people, we can save their lives. I usually say that they are the heroes of our planet, and the people that most suffer from the inefficient systems that agri-food systems that we have. So poverty and inequality, they are endemic in food systems. More than 80% of the poor, they live in rural areas. And of these, 75% earn part of their living with agri-food systems. These are numbers, okay, that we need to take in mind when we think about the agri-food systems. Next, please. So this is a tab that we put from produced by IFPRI, FAO, and based on ILO 2020 research. So you can say that putting all these people that I mentioned, okay, livelihoods, 3.2 billion people, and 1.2 in jobs, directly jobs from agri-food systems, and all the value chain of the agri-food systems where they work. Next, please. So it's important to understand what our Secretary General Antonio Guterres said, that humanity is waging a war against nature, because they are involved biodiversity in agri-food systems. We cannot mention and talk about agri-food systems without mentioning about nature, about environment, about what is going on in the planet. So biodiversity is collapsing. 1 million species are at risk of extinction. We need to talk about this every day. Our ecosystems are disappearing before our eyes. Deserts are spreading. Wetlands are being lost. Every year we lose 10 million hectares of forests. Just here in Brazil. And I don't know if you are following what happens in Amazon. But it's something that every day we need to speak about this, expecting that someone takes something against it. In 2019, carbon dioxide levels reached 148% of pre-industrial levels. So today, and all of that I mentioned, it's not something that I created in my mind. These numbers, they are scientific numbers okay, of all the people that work every day in this area. So today we've reached 1.2 graus Celsius warming, and we've already witnessed unprecedented weather extremes and volatility in all regions and on all continents. We are heading towards a thunderous temperature of around a rise of 3 to 5 graus Celsius in this century. So that's why food systems are one of the main reasons why we cannot stay within the ecological limits of our planet. I think that we need to work thinking about creating foods, complex food systems and sustainable food systems, and the other eye looking at our environment. Next, please, Monique. So, what's the investment? I spoke about the problems, and now I will try to show you that it's possible to change this picture. I continue believing that it's possible if we wake up right now and try to change the way that we do our food systems. What's the investment needed to end world hunger? So according to a study, this study was made 3 years ago, and WFP and FAO, the two sister agencies in Rome, that to eradicate, anyone can go there, I put the source, can go there and read the study. We can eradicate extreme poverty and hunger in a sustainable way. It's not giving food, but investing in food systems. If we had around $267 billion per year in investments. You could say, okay, never will happen because you never have $267 billion per year until 2030. It's important to explain that this amount would enable more food supply to the poor, job creation, financing for a smallholder business, improvement in their livelihoods, and rural and agrarian development. It's not to purchase food and to give food to these people in need. It's to create sustainability. As I mentioned, 3.5 billion people would be attended by this, and 1 billion directly. So it's around 4.5 billion people that live in livelihoods and live in the systems, in agri-food systems that would be attended. So never will happen because we don't have these funds. We don't have this money to end world hunger. Next, please, Monique. But I can show you that cost $267 billion a year. Nowadays, the road GDP, the all GDP in the roads is around $93 trillion, okay, per year. I like to mention this because the world military expenditures just last year was, for the first time, over $2 trillion. We, as human beings, we think it's okay to waste $2.1 trillion in bombs to kill people, but we don't think it's fair to give $267 billion to end world hunger. The problem is humanity. We think it's completely okay to give $2.1 trillion for military expenditures. And it's increasing with the war in Russia. All the NATO and countries and other countries, they decided to increase their military expenditures. It's the most important for the world nowadays to waste their money in military expenditures. It's not important to put the money to end world hunger and to create sustainable food systems. This is a problem. Just USA $800 billion a year in military expenditures. So to end hunger and extreme poverty would be around 2.8% of world GDP and 12% of military expenditures. If we decided now, okay, we will cut 10% of our military expenditures, we would end hunger and extreme poverty. We know how to do it. The international organizations, they know how to do it. The NGOs working, the experts know how to do it. The scholars know how to do it, but we don't do it because we don't have political will to do it. The humanity, the countries, they don't want to do it. This is what we are facing right now in the world. And I think it's possible. I can show you it's possible. And the other problem, next please, Monique. The other problem that we have in the road is nowadays the growing income concentration. And we are increasing the global inequalities in the road. So you saw last week a billionaire, okay, he decided to purchase the Twitter because he was blocked sometimes in Twitter. He decided, I will purchase this social media. How much is this? Oh, $44 billion. Oh, I give you 45, keep the change. So they have $45 billion to purchase a social media. They have funds to go to visit the moon, to stay there 25 minutes and return. And they have, nowadays we have in the road, we have around 7.8 billion people in the road. And we have 2,770 billionaires. The problem is that these 7,700 billionaires, they own 1/3 of the world's wealth, around $30 trillion. Do you think this is sustainable? I'm not asking if it's fair. I believe it's fair. They worked so hard to achieve this wealth, but it's not fair. It's not sustainable, okay, for the world to continue in this with this situation. And I'm not asking for these billionaires to become poor. They will never become poor, but they don't need all this wealth, and the world need part of this wealth to create the food systems that we need to save people. So this is the discussion that we need to create nowadays in the whole world. So it's possible to end hunger and extreme poverty in the world. Well, what we need to do is to develop inclusive and sustainable value chains, to ensure investments in agricultural industrialization with positive social, economic, and environmental impacts. We need to combine the capacities of local and regional actors in analysis, technical assistance, political dialogue, investment promotion. So action must be driven at country level by governments in their local contexts. And these 5 actions, they are, in my opinion, they are crucial for us to achieve the road that we are trying to achieve. We need nourish all people. It's not just giving food. What kind of food? We need healthy food. We need nutritious food for all people. We need to boost nature-based solutions, like Professor John explained. We need to advance equitable livelihoods, decent work, and empowered communities. We need to build resilience to vulnerabilities, shocks, and stresses. My work is to support countries. My job is to support countries in Africa and in Asia to create sustainable solutions, to create sustainable food systems. And you can't believe how they are suffering from this conflict. In Ukraine, most of the food that would go to feed their people was coming from Ukraine and Russia, and now they don't have this food. And with the climate crisis, they are suffering from different problems to produce the food. And we are trying to support them in this production. Even Brazil is one of the countries that support other countries in the world to create sustainable food systems. So we need to build resilience to vulnerabilities, shocks and stresses. It's possible to do that. And we need to accelerate the means of implementation. We still have 8 years until the year of 2030. I think that what we need is to wake up now, is to discuss these issues now and change our future. We cannot change the past, but we can change our future starting right now. I think it's possible. So I would like to thank you, your attention, and I'm ready for the questions that Sérgio will make. Thank you very much, people.
So thank you, Daniel. Also a very, very insightful speech, and also challenging, because sometimes people discuss the issues of hunger and food insecurity and says, well, there is no way out. There is no change. There is no solution. And you indicate some of them. And this is very, very interesting. So I would like to start with some very short, quick comments on both presentation, because I think they both of you illustrate, you indicate very well some important issues that we have in this topic of sustainable food system and food security. So it's actually maybe I would say that, well, finally, in the 21st century, the world is coming on a time that humanity is able to sort out the problems of hunger, the problems of famines. So I think we still have people suffering from these problems, but the point is that at the end, after so long time, so long people suffering along history on hunger and deprivation, we have now the chances to supply everyone with a daily meal that overcomes with hunger. So we have here two directions. I would say John is saying that in his presentation that food supply, food issues are going probably in the next couple of years to a more technological path, especially by the industries, the transformation of the raw materials by completely new kind of transformation. So that is an important way. So, and then the point would be, John, my first point that I will leave to you for a comment. In what extent would you say that food security or overcome hunger would be a matter for this kind of, let's say, narrative based on that perspective of new investments, food industry, food, all kind of transformation that you mentioned? And probably you could add that some of those people that are leading these investments, these processes, they are also supporters of environmental issues. I have heard, and you certainly too, some of that people saying that, well, the solution of the unsustainability is going to a path in which food will be produced in industries, in urban places. So this is a point that you have not had time to touch, but maybe you would like to raise some points on that. But there are, of course, other issues that you very interesting highlight. For instance, I would just to point out a little bit more that in last year COP26 in the UK, there was a clear message that food and agriculture is a main driver for climate change, and the way that we use the soil, the way we use the natural resources matters for climate change. So so land and climate change in the last IPCC report, it's also clear connection. So I would maybe raise the point that if in certain extent these issues of climate change and how climate harmful can be addressed by these new tendencies, new processes that you raise in your point. But I will not extend too much my comment, and I just would like to ask you, if you, John, if it would be possible to explore a little bit more what might be the consequences of these changes that you point out for farmers, especially for the farming sectors, and in developing countries, like for instance in Latin America, South America, countries like Brazil and Argentina, but also for Africa. You know, if food production is moving from the farms to other sites, what will be the consequences? What will happen for the farmers, and then especially for the small scale farmers, for family farms? And another point that maybe you can make a comment is, what about the governments? What about the regulations on these new tendencies? Because all these processes so far are going very fast and very rapidly through a global level, to an international level. But in what extent regulations or international organization, at least, like for instance World Trade Organization, or for instance World Health Organization, could intervene or could play a role in these processes? So these are the points that I would like to raise to our discussion in this morning here. And Danielle, for you, I would like to also ask you about to explore maybe a little bit more the other side of the coin of the food insecurity, which is nowadays the epidemic of obesity and overweight in the world. So you properly explore the issues of shortage of food and how it might be overcome in terms to use financing systems, mobilizing funds, mobilizing resources, maybe better use the money that is already there in order to face this problem worldwide. So you clearly indicate the sources from where the money comes from, if really it would exist a political strength and political volunteer from the leaders around the world. So the point, but another process that is going on now, not just in developing countries and poor countries, but also is happening in developed countries, in the US mainly, which is the epidemic of obesity, which causes a lot of food insecurity by the consumption of not a healthy food. So, in what extent, or in what ways, World Health World Food Program is addressing this kind of things? For instance, for children, for child health. This would be an important point. For instance, not in some countries you can supplement these problems with using, let's say, medical receipts to overcome. But what about to stimulate? What about to foster organic and other agroecological schemes of food supply for these problems, for this hunger, for these food insecurity issues? And then the other point is that in what extent, what would you expect in this disruptive times? And this is more a point that I would like to hear you about, your opinion. What you are expecting, you or the World Food Program or the United Nations agencies, in terms of the times that we are facing, of the deregulation or completely confusing times with this war in Ukraine. Has John mentioned, Ukraine and Russia is the food basket of at least some of the foods that the world needs. And this is clearly now that there will be a lot of harm in the food system in the coming years. So, in what extent World Food Program is preparing? What are the policies? What are the strategies? Maybe you can explain. You can tell us a little bit about what you as an international organization leader expecting for that, and what about the consequences of this huge migration streams of people? So, well, I would like to stay here. I raise my points. These are my questions for both of you. We also can collect some of the questions that are coming in now here in the private chat. I guess you can read them, and I will give you the floor again, and you can maybe make comments on my points, and also include these questions that coming from Claudia Molina, Marcela de Souza, and also Cristiane Marques Pitaluga. I would also thank you for them to raise questions for us. So thank you for the moment, and I think we can start again with John. Maybe John, you would like to have the word. We have an extra 28 minutes because we will close up at 11 today.
Thanks very much for those comments, Sérgio. And I've seen that the two questions specifically directed at me, which I'll answer. One from Flavia Assis, and she says, you mentioned fermentation companies receiving larger investments than cultivated meat companies in 2021. Why do you think this is happening? Well, I think it's important to understand that the fermentation sector is a traditional sector in the food industry. You have a huge experience of brewing, which goes sort of 6,000 years or more, and other fermentation practices. So fermentation is a more mature technology. It has also benefited from the shift to fermentation in the pharmaceutical industry. And so modern techniques of fermentation are also dominated. That means that to a large extent, the fermentation, the demand for financing for fermentation is at a different position in the life cycle. It's at the demand is for large scale investment. And so there's a tendency for investments to be higher volume, because the issue is firms are already producing things like 20,000 tons a year of microorganisms and fungi which are transformed into farinhas. And the expectation is that this can be doubled, tripled, and can very quickly come on stream at prices which are very competitive with existing, particularly white meats. And so for lots of firms nowadays, including big firms, established firms in the ingredient sector, particularly, see fermentation as a more realistic, short-term, economically viable alternative. And given that they're at the level of large-scale investments, then there's a tendency for the financing to be in higher volumes. I think that explains a little the question of fermentation. There are, as you know, there are three types of fermentation. There's the traditional fermentation. There's the fermentation which is biomass fermentation, where the fungi and the microorganisms feed on biomass, normally carbohydrates, and transform them into protein. That's the issue. That's the fundamental question of the fermentation industry. And that is a very interesting industry because it can use waste products from other industries. You can use the waste product from the brewing industry, for instance. And so you can develop circular economy effects. And this would be a very efficient and way of developing protein, cheap protein. And there is the precision fermentation, which genetically engineers the yeasts or the fungi to produce very precise protein effects. That is already the case in cheese production, for instance. Cheese production, the rennet from cheese production is now produced entirely by genetically engineered yeasts. So that, I think, helps. And just talking about that question of yeast will lead into the second question from Claudia Molina, which asked, could you give examples of rejections on the demand side? I think that's a very important question, because we've seen that the whole dynamic of transgenics was called in question by social movements, which were supported by public policy and by sectors of the food industry, which were attuned to demand questions. And we can see similar developments emerging, for instance, but I would say it's a more nuanced development. The social movements and the interests around health, and particularly the health issues to do with cardiovascular diseases, diabetes, or obesidade, obesity, these segments are very unfavorable to at least the current generation of vegetable alternative meats, the burgers of the Impossible Foods and the Beyond Burger the nuggets and the in response to because they are seen as fundamentally junk food, changing one junk food for another junk food, and that they are high in sodium, high in saturated fats. In response to that, the Impossible Foods has produced what it calls its Burger 2.0 and insists that every 6 months at least, the burgers are losing the junk characteristics. They're going lower and lower on saturated fats, lower and lower on sodium. And so on these aspects, I think the criticism can be responded to by these firms. The second point, and it relates to the strongest, more general argument, is that there is a problem with ultra-processed foods. And that's a big debate. And that shifts from the nutritional components to the processes which are seen to be negative from the point of view of health, and also to produce not food, but compositions which can be eaten. And so the idea is that food should be from basic ingredients at the most, and food should not be created as sort of building blocks from molecules, proteins and fats. That is an argument which will be developed, and so I think there is a strong reason to imagine that there will be opposition from the whole of that component, the way that the food system is seen. If you look at from the environment, I think the position is different. And there's a very good indication of that. One of the main environmental writers for The Guardian, Monbiot, has come out strongly in favor of cellular meat and other innovations, specifically because the central issue for him is climate and biodiversity. And the gains of these options in terms of the environment are very, very clear. Whether you're looking at water, whether you're looking at the land use, all these issues are extremely favorable in comparison with the current cattle raising, feed cultivation system. So I think that will be strong. Again, animal rights are very much in favor, because you can have your meat without killing animals. And the PETA movement, for instance, has a competition to promote cellular meat. So I think there will be a very variegated response. And it's not clear exactly. I think the hardest point is the discussion on ultra-processed foods, which will have to be developed. On Sérgio's point, just connecting up with that, is fundamentally the forces projecting the new types of foods, as far as I can see, fundamentally they're motivated by the environment on one side and the cruelty seen to be unacceptable cruelty of the industrial meat system. So it's animal welfare and the environment. And the proponents argue that with the full development of these alternatives, you can have a process of what they call rewilding, which would be allowing nature to recover, and which would connect with the point that Danielle has made about the alarming number of species which are being eliminated by the day. So that is the strongest point. On the other hand, I think if you look at it, it's also the second question is it's a fundamentally urban-oriented innovation process. Its presupposition is that the world is urban. And if it's not fully urban today, it will be fully urban in 30 years' time. And so the issue is an urban food system. Mm-hmm. And in that sense, I think the key question is the degree to which these options, they can be susceptible to decentralized applications, and the extent to which they can be subject increasingly to systems of open innovation as against very tight patent systems. If these two criterion would be working, then you will get a movement whereby food is integrated into the daily life of the urban citizens at all the levels at which they operate. And so I can see that as being the main line of conflict and tension. In a sense, all the tensions associated with the struggles between small farmers and agribusiness in the rural may well be reproduced in the urban context. The debates about concentration versus integration of food systems into daily life, etc. And so as I think if you're looking at the farmer of tomorrow, you're looking at the urban citizen and not so much the rural. I think the rural will be increasingly a question associated with the recuperation of nature. It will be with a whole range of more plural systems of biomass production for vegetable proteins. So there's a whole line of linkage there between. It will break down potentially the monoculture of soy. In fact, soy as a GMO is not a very favorable input for direct human consumption. And you see a shift. Lots of these firms, the vegetable meat firms, they specifically say they're not GMO. And you're opening up the development, therefore, of a different relationship with agriculture. On the other hand, I think a whole range of rural poverty now will continue to be the object of the type of policies which Danielle is proposing and developing. I'll leave it at that because time is going by.
Thank you so much, John. So Danielle, please. We have just to remember you that all of you that we have time up to 2 to 11 because Plinio will also address a final message to you. So Danielle, the floor is yours to.
Okay. No, I will be brief. I think that it's important to understand the first question from Sérgio. Nowadays, we have the increasing of obesity in the road. As exactly what Professor John Wilkinson said. We have some problems. To achieve a road with zero hunger, SDG 2, we need first to decrease the poverty rates, SDG 1, okay? And to decrease poverty rates, we need to decrease inequalities, SDG 10. So everything is linked. So the world is real unequal. And the people, they don't have money to afford to purchase healthy food. Sometimes I asked, I was in an event, and we were saying about you need to eat healthy food to organize your plate better. And the person raised his hand and said, okay, I wake up 5 in the morning, I get 2 buses to my job, I stay 2 hours in the bus. When I arrive there, I just have the time and the funds to take a Coke and something trash in the market to eat, because they don't have money. This is the problem. So they know that they need to eat more vegetables, fruits, fresh vegetables, fresh fruits, nutritious meals. They watch YouTubers explaining the importance to eat nutritious meals, but they don't have funds to afford. They cannot afford this. This is a problem. So we need to invest more in agroecology and to support more the smallholder farmers that produce fresh vegetables, eggs, and fruits. For these meals could be decrease the price, and of course increase the salaries of the population for them to afford. So everything is linked. We cannot deal just with one sector without touching the other sector. So we need to decrease inequality. We need to increase the salaries. We need to increase the power of the people to buy the food that they need. They know the importance, but they don't have here in Brazil and even in US. Sometimes I go there and I see how that people work all the time. Okay, just thinking about working, and they don't have time to take a fresh, a good, and a nutritious food. And sometimes they don't have funds to purchase it. So it's important to say that the conflict in Ukraine and Russia, what we need right now is to stop this conflict, to stop the war, and to bring the sides to the table and discuss solutions to stop this conflict. And what happens in the road? One part continues and the other sell more weapons to the other part. So they don't want to stop this war. And the warlords and the army industry, they are laughing because they are getting so much money. Everybody is purchasing more weapons. So what we need is to stop this conflict, because Ukraine and Russia, they were suppliers from WFP, from these international, very important suppliers. And a lot of food that we use it to purchase were from Russia and Ukraine. Now we cannot, because they are not producing, we cannot purchase. And of course, we cannot put this food to the countries in need, that they don't have enough food produced there. So it's a problem. And as I mentioned, the prices, because all of this mess, the prices, they are rising. So the prices of food, they are rising all around the world. So the funds that we use it to have, just for you to mention, the annual fund for WFP to feed all these people is around $5 billion, and didn't increase it with all this problems with COVID, with the war, with the climate change didn't increase. So it's just $5 billion to take care of all this population. WFP does not have enough funds. So this is a problem. And the funds, they come from the countries. The countries, okay, they support the international organization with funds to give food to the people in need. So this is something that we need to address, to talk to them and then stop any kind of conflict, any kind of war. Because I mentioned before, 60% that the people in need, they are living in this situation, in areas of conflicts. And we don't have just Ukraine and Russia conflict. We have several other conflicts that for the last 3, 4, 5 years and doesn't stop. Okay, and it's something that it's all the time trying, and the conflicts continue, and people dying. Most of the people that dying, they are not military, they are civil people. So this is something that we need to discuss this every day. Marcela de Souza made a question: how can we convince people that world hunger is such an important matter? The only way to convince people is to do what we are doing right now, is to discuss this issue, is to raise this issue. We don't see any people discussing how the world is wasting so much wealth, so much money in military expenditures. You don't see this. Nobody talks about this, and we are increasing each year by year the waste of money, because this money comes from whom? From the people that pay taxes, and we are paying for bombs. We are paying for the continuity of military actions. We are paying for wars, and we could be paying to try to end hunger worldwide, but we are not. Our money doesn't go to them. So this is something that we need to discuss all the time. We need to raise these issues. And the other question: is it fair to say that we have enough food but poor distribution? Of course. The problem in the world is not food. Nowadays we have all the technicals, everything that Professor John Wilkinson raised. We have other actions that we could implement. What we need is to decrease inequality. What we need is to try to have more people with money to achieve their needs and to purchase healthy food. This is what we need right now. And for that, we need to make these people that have more to pay more taxes, because all of these people that I mentioned, we all know, World Bank know, IMF know, World Economic Forum know, and sometimes people say, no, you are a communist. No, I'm not a communist. I'm just trying to say that it's not fair to continue with this situation. We have just few people with almost, and they are getting even more. Each day they are getting even more. And it's not sustainable. We need to tax these people. They need to put more money. And in the World Economic Forum this year, I attended, I am a member, and much of these billionaires, they said exactly the same. I need to pay more taxes. But in my country, they are decreasing my taxes. And all the countries, they are doing that. I don't understand why this. So they decrease taxes from the billionaires, and who pay taxes? The middle class and the poor people. This is what happens. And we need to change this picture if we want to create sustainable food systems and to change the hungry people in the world. So the last question would be: transition to agroecology will be an alternative. I think this is the future. All the producers of food, they are looking for that. In the past, people didn't use to purchase organic. Now, if you go in a supermarket, even in US, if you go to Walmart, the organic food, they are in the first view because people, they understand the importance to purchase organic food. The problem is that it's more expensive, and not the poor people, they cannot afford, they cannot pay this price. And what we need is to invest more in agroecological producers to decrease the price for more people to have the incentive, to have the condition to pay the price, the correct price. This is the problems. And what we need, I would like to say that an event like this is very important for us to raise these issues and to discuss these problems. Only discussing the problems, we can achieve the solutions. If we don't discuss the problem, it's not a problem, we will never have a solution. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Daniel, with this provocative and very useful and points that you raised. Also, thanks, John, for this very enlightful presentation. I think both of you you gave a very interesting insights for this forum, for this debates. And I hope we did our job this morning. So I will immediately pass the word to Plinio Nastari to say some final words, to leave us a message. And for my side, as moderator, thank you all of you, both of you, for the pleasure to have you here today. Thank you so much. And Plinio, the word is yours again.
Thank you very much, Professor Schneider. You had an excellent job as moderator of this seminar today. I think we had 2 master classes, actually, very good preparations for the full Global Agribusiness Forum. I think the final words that Professor Wilkinson and Dr. Balaban expressed should be written in stone. It's a lot of food for thought. It's amazing, the data which has been discussed today. Thank you very much from both sharing their intelligence and their wit. It's amazing that so many people are affected by food security. We're talking about over 800 million people. And it's amazing how this problem could be solved with as Dr. Balaban indicated, a redirection of funds, something of the order of 12.7% of the current military expending, and something which is at hand. It's just a matter of political will, of people understanding that there's a solution at hand. Not only talking about calories, but talking about quality of food, quality of diet. And I think this is a role for all of us to take upon. It's very righteous to say that we have to keep the pressure. And we see GAF, the Global Agribusiness Forum, as one of the effective ways of achieving this on a global scale. So we thank you all very much, the 3 of you, Professor Schneider, Professor Wilkinson, Dr. Balaban, for your participation. We thank all the attendees for sending questions and comments and participating in this venue. And speaking directly from the quarters of Iowa State University here in Ames, Iowa, I can only thank you all very much for the excellent discussion and material that you have brought. We look forward to having you all on July 25 and 26. We are having the confirmation of very high-level authorities, and it's going to be an opportunity to exchange with them the views which have been expressed here today, and also in the 3 previous warm-up GAFs that we had before. So thank you very much. Have a great day. The material is going to be available for further consultation through platform Strix One and through the portal of the Global Agribusiness Forum. Thank you very much for all the people involved in organization of GAF. And again, thank you very much, Professor Schneider, Professor Wilkinson, Dr. Balaban. It was an excellent discussion, and we were rewarded with your sharing, your gracious sharing, and your time today. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye to everyone.
And again, we thank all these companies supporting this event. In particular, we thank CropLife and also all the supporting organizations, Bradesco and DEAG, VBSO Advogados, Aniara, Carey, Aurora Cooperative, Cochupé, Lisplan, Kentic, Caldic, and all the institutions, associations which are promoting GAF, Brazilian Rural Society, ABRAMILHO, MAIZALL, ABCZ, ABRAFRUTAS, Fórum Nacional Sucroenergético, UNEM, ABPA, and thank all team DATAGRO. Thank you very much. Have a great day.
Tecnologia conecta pessoas e transforma vidas. CropLife Brasil.
Através da nossa plataforma, impulsionamos o desenvolvimento de profissionais, compartilhamos experiências e fomentamos o ecossistema de inovação, aproximando pessoas e empresa. Seja muito bem-vindo à Strix One.
Aqui você vai encontrar diversos programas e minisséries em vídeo e podcasts, webinários e transmissões, cursos e treinamentos sobre temas técnicos, artigos, publicações e palestras dos eventos mais importantes da cadeia sucroenergética e agro do país.
Junte-se à Strix One e tenha acesso 100% online a conteúdos novos semanalmente em diferentes formatos. Estude no tempo livre e dê um upgrade na sua carreira. Crie conexões com profissionais da sua área, forme parcerias de negócio e divulgue o seu produto para o público certo. Aqui nós semeamos o conhecimento.
Você sabia que quase 60% da população mundial já está online? Isso porque a internet nos permite economia de tempo, redução de custos, bem-estar, motivação, entre muitos outros benefícios. Uma pesquisa mostrou que só durante a quarentena a busca por treinamentos online cresceu 130% no Google.
E aí, vai ficar de fora da comunidade mais inovadora do Brasil? Faça parte da Strix One.
Vamos juntos? Strix One, infinitas ideias, uma comunidade.